Λοιπόν, να καλημερίσουμε όλους σας και να ευχαριστήσουμε πάρα πολύ για τη σημερινή σας παρουσία εδώ στην εκπαίδευση που οργανώνει η τέταρτη ομάδα, υποομάδα του Personal and Professional Development at Frederick University για τα Sustainable Development Goals και το ρόλο των πανεπιστημίων. Λοιπόν, να καλημερίσω την κυρία Νατάσα Φρυδερίκου, Dear Mrs. Fredericu, President of the University's Council, dear Professor Demosthenos, Rector of Frederick University, dear Mrs. Cortez, Vice President of Networks at UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, dear colleagues, dear audience. Now, as courtesy to our invited speaker, I will continue in English, and I would please like to ask you to stay muted during the presentation, during the talk. If you have any questions during the talk, you can type them down in the chat, or you can address the questions to the invited speaker at the end of the talk. So it is with a great pleasure that we receive you here today in our virtual training meeting on the role of universities in the achievement of the 17 United Nations Goals for Sustainable Development. We are opening today's events with a welcoming address by the university's president, Mrs. Anastasia Friderikou.
Thank you, Chrysanthi. Dear Mrs. Cortez, dear Rector, dear Dr. Gaji, dear colleagues, it is with great pleasure and excitement that today I have the honor of addressing this gathering. My excitement stems from the fact that we have with us a very special speaker, Mrs. Maria Cortez, the Vice President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, but most importantly, a person who is an expert on the SDGs and the role of universities in their achievement. I first heard Mrs. Cortez's name a few years ago when I read the first guide, Getting Started with the SDGs in Universities, that was done in order to help universities around the world understand their role in respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. Then I heard it again when the second guide, Accelerating Education for the SDGs in Universities, was published, and Mrs. Cortez was among the main authors. Mrs. Cortez, we are truly delighted that you are here with us today. Thank you. We at Frederick University understand that we have a critical role in helping the society achieve the SDGs. We embrace our responsibility in the transition to a sustainable future. We are committed to ensuring that through our research, our learning and teaching, our operations, and our leadership, our university will be a vehicle for change and will play an important role in the change we want to see in our world. In 2019, Frederick University became an institutional member of the UN STSN and is one of the founding members of the Cyprus branch of the Sustainable Solutions Network. I have to say that the university is already doing many activities that contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. There are so many brilliant examples on all levels: teaching, research, policies, operations, and our connections to society. However, we strongly believe that in order to achieve our ultimate goal, which is someday the SDGs to become an internal part of who we are and part of our daily operations on all 4 levels, we cannot depend on luck. We cannot do it by chance. We need a strategy, dedication, and commitment. And we need everybody on board, a small dedicated.
Natasha, μου είσαι mute.
Sorry, okay. So I don't know, okay, I will start from a few seconds ago. So I said, we cannot depend on luck. We cannot do it by chance. We need a strategy, dedication, and commitment. And we need everybody on board. A small dedicated group of people cannot do it alone. That is why we're here. In our efforts to achieve this over the past few years, we took some important decisions. Number 1, in the 2020 review of the University Strategic Plan, the University Council approved the inclusion of a new action in the short-term action plan. Specifically, Action 13 states, the Council of the University identifies that the SDGs directly match and overlap with the core values and goals of Frederick University, and to this end, they should be strongly promoted and adopted within the operations. Actions should be undertaken to ensure that there is widespread understanding of those goals among the community, identification at departmental level of specific goals that can be served, and rethinking of curriculum development and research directions to better promote and support them. Specific policies and decisions should be taken at governance level to ensure that the university leads by example towards serving the SDGs. Number 2, we decided to take part in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, which are dedicated to the SDGs, so as to have someone to measure us and drive us to improve. Number 3, the Personal and Professional Development Center of the university, which provides a range of developmental opportunities to faculty and staff in order to enable them to enhance their professional and personal skills and ultimately reach their full potential, has a dedicated subcommittee which is responsible for the provision of quality education for academic and administrative staff that will facilitate integration of sustainable development goals in all the dimensions of the university's operations. Dr. Kaji is the coordinator of this subcommittee. Number 4, since last year, we introduced the Michael Federico Awards, which aim to recognize and reward groups or individuals from our community whose actions promote the core values of the founder and the university. 3 of those awards are directly linked to the SDGs. And number 5, we started the mapping process, the identification of what we are doing on SDGs on all levels. And so far, we completed the mapping of our research activities, and we're in the process of doing the same for our courses. This training is in line with our efforts to empower and upskill our faculty members, administrative staff, and researchers. Our goal is to help everyone understand their own role and also their own tremendous power in making a huge difference in our world, to enable them to reimagine the future we want to live in, and to give them the knowledge and the skills to bring the SDGs to their everyday work, to help them be able to make new policies, focus their research on finding solutions to hard problems that our planet is facing, work hard with colleagues from different disciplines, and see and approach problems from a different angle, and give our students not only the knowledge and the competences to find solutions, but motivate them and inspire them so they want to become agents of change themselves. They want to be the change they want to see in the world. Dear Crisanti, thank you for your drive and your initiative in inviting Mrs. Cortez. Dear Mrs. Cortez, thank you for being with us today. I look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you, Natasha. We should actually thank all the group members, because it was a common effort and collaborative process. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015. They indicate the path that humanity can follow in order to address contemporary social, environmental, and economic challenges and look forward to a promising, bright future. The goals recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. Education for sustainable development as quality education is recognized as a key enabler of all the Sustainable Development Goals. It is one of the driving forces that can empower learners with knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes to take informed decisions and make responsible actions for environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society. It is a lifelong learning process running through all levels of formal education, enriching individuals through non-formal and informal educational settings too. It enhances the cognitive, social, emotional, and behavioral dimensions of learning. Universities, as education and professionalization hubs, have a fundamental role to play in empowering and motivating individual and collective action for the achievement of the SDGs, both through education, as well as by setting an example of a model sustainable community with sustainability permeating all levels of universities' operations. Acknowledging this role, Frederick University places special emphasis in training and supporting our staff in this challenging endeavor. We consider this to be a collective effort in which all of us can and need to participate, each from their role and function, that being academic, administrative, or research-oriented. Today's training is the first training organized by the Personal and Professional Development at Frederick University Subcommittee on the SDGs. The objective of the training is to help us become familiar with the SDGs and understand the potent role of universities as multiplying factors to their achievement. Other trainings that will follow will engage the academic staff in a process of reflection about opportunities within our programs of study for addressing the SDGs and employing transformative ESD pedagogies. We are very happy to welcome Mrs. Maria Cortés Puig, our guest speaker today, who will be our guide in today's reflection and discussion of what we can do as a university and how in order to support and promote the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Maria Cortés Puig is the Vice President of Networks of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which operates under the auspices of the United Nations Secretary General to support the implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. She leads the SDSN efforts to build a global network of universities, research centers, and civil society organizations that pursue sustainable development innovation locally through research, public education, executive training, demonstration projects, conveying of social stakeholders, and incubation of solutions. Prior to joining SDSN, Maria worked for UNESCO at the Science Policy and Sustainable Development Division for 2 years. Previously, she coordinated the European Energy and Transport programs at the Polytechnic University in Madrid and worked for 2 years as a scientific officer at the Spanish Office for Science and Technology in Brussels, analyzing the EU policies for international cooperation, transport, and energy. She began her professional career with the National Institute of Aerospace Technology in Madrid as a technology transfer officer. Maria holds a master's degree in the International Affairs from Columbia University and BSc and MSc degrees in physics from the Complutense University in Madrid. Mrs. Cortés, we are very happy for having you with us today and thankful for finding the time to accommodate this talk in your schedule. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Federico, Dr. Kaji Beltran. It's an absolute honor to be here with you today. I have to say that indeed the university is the host of the SDSN Cyprus and one of the most active members that we have in our network of 1,600 institutions around the world. So it's to say, to put things into perspective. So perhaps to continue putting things into context, and before I start with my sharing my screen, let's just think about why it's so urgent and why it's so crucial to put sustainable development at the core of our actions. So the World Meteorological Organization's report that was published, I think 6 months ago or so, called The State of the Planet, actually reveals that in 2020, even despite the pandemic and the lockdowns of the pandemic, global greenhouse gas emissions actually increased. The global mean surface temperature was 1.2 degrees Celsius, higher than pre-industrial levels, which is terrifying. This makes 2020 and subsequently 2021 some of the warmest years on record. And these increased temperatures obviously promote or produce an increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events, such as, I believe, the storm that is now in your region in Europe, but of course the wildfires that we've been seeing in California, in Australia, in the Amazon, the floods and the droughts that are affecting so many other regions of the world. But this is not only what we're seeing. We're seeing biodiversity loss as a rate of massive extinction. We're seeing a decrease in food security after years, almost decades of food security progress, we're now seeing a turn, and I think it's 690 million people, or what represents 9% of the world's population, are undernourished. And on top of this, we have the pandemic. UN estimates that 120 million people have been pushed to poverty due to the pandemic. And the COVID-19 Lancet Commission that Professor Sachs chairs has revealed that the pandemic has not only brought to light, but has extremely exacerbated social, economic, and other inequalities. Now, the time of action is now, and this is extremely urgent and important. So to sum it up, the paramount challenge of our time is to balance the very urgent and important needs of humanity, such as eradicating hunger and poverty, with the very urgent needs of our planet, such as ending biodiversity loss, climate change, tackling climate change, and then addressing ecosystem degradation. So thankfully, we do have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals were adopted by 193 countries in 2015. In this time of this despair and where we don't really see the light at the end of the tunnel, the SDGs do offer, as was mentioned just before, a roadmap to a sustainable future. I'm going to quickly share my screen and start this presentation. I don't know if you can see the presentation. Yes? Perfect. So I'll start going through it. So today I'm going to briefly discuss what the SDGs are and where we're at in achieving these goals, and then focus on specifically the role of universities. So the SDGs have been mentioned by some people as being, along with the Paris Agreement, the most significant UN agreement since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are a number of things that make these goals really unique. Here we have them. And first of all, they are very comprehensive. So the idea of these goals was to have some sort of goal-based agenda after the MDGs, but one that incorporated the environmental sustainability to the economic prosperity and social equity pillars in a solid manner. Now, you can see that it covers issues such as sustainable cities, gender equality, life before under the water. And it does so with the 17 goals and 169 targets that are tremendously interconnected. And so one cannot really think about one of these goals and subsequently try to achieve the next. It is not appropriate to try to create economic prosperity and good jobs if we don't take into consideration gender equality or the ecosystems. Now, this is one of the things that makes this agenda very precious, the complexity. And one of the reasons why it's so complex is because they were defined with a highly participatory process. So these goals were negotiated years. And very interestingly, the Secretary General of the UN decided to create a number of consultative bodies that were quite original, such as the high-level panel, such as the open working group, and then numerous consultations, open consultations, online, at country level, and so. For example, the results of some of the online public consultations were very interesting because they brought up topics such as access to quality education, but then also access to decent jobs. This was not in the agenda at all at the beginning, but it was very difficult for diplomats or heads of states to brush this off when it had so much popular support. So this is a comprehensive and complex agenda. It's also one that was developed with highly participatory mechanisms, and then it's universal. So all countries that adopted them are abided by them. They committed to achieve these goals. They committed to work together for sustainable development, understood as it's defined in this agenda. These goals also brought up this concept of leaving no one behind. So indeed, the focus is on the most vulnerable people. So this does not just mean that we need to address extreme poverty and not just poverty and the absolute deprivation of all of the of education, of health, of food. But it also means that every measure and every strategy to implement these goals needs to be taking into consideration the leave no one behind principle. So it needs to look at the trade-offs. It needs to analyze whether with this measure, we are actually affecting another community via international or other negative spillover effects. And another thing that makes this agenda quite original is that it has a place-based approach. So this is a universal agenda, and yet there is an insistence in the text that it needs to be localized. So what achieving these goals means for a macro city in Asia is very different to a rural community in the Sahara. And so each of these places need to consider this agenda as a whole and need to contextualize this agenda. And this is very important because today we talk so much about systems approach, but it's really easy to think about the system of a city and see the interconnections of these goals reveal themselves. So if we think about a city and we're thinking about the public transportation system, then topics such as gender equality, such as poverty or quality infrastructure clearly come into play. So the question now is, where are we at? This was adopted in 2015 and came to place in 2016. So with only 8 years left, where are we at? SDGs publishes annually the Sustainable Development Report, where we present the performance of each country vis-a-vis the goals. And we have, among other things, a ranking of how the countries are positioned, but then most importantly, the country profiles where we showcase the performance vis-a-vis each of the goals. So this is this year's ranking, and I have Spain here highlighted because I presented this ranking recently here. But what I wanted to highlight with this slide is that our other annual report, the World Happiness Report, ranking shows quite a correlation between some of the countries that are investing and vetting on this agenda and those that have high indices of happiness. This is an agenda that is focused on well-being and putting people and planet at the center. And probably it is fair to say that it's an agenda that an agenda of happiness. Now, back to the question of where are we at? Very sadly, this year's report presents for the first time since we have been publishing these reports, a decrease in the global average performance. So the pandemic, and this has been revealed in every single one of the goals, has produced a major setback for sustainable development everywhere in the world. This decrease in the global average is in fact underestimated because for many of the indicators that we use, we didn't have the most current data. So what you see here is mostly that decrease is mostly pulled by the data on poverty, so the increased levels in poverty that I will show right now. So we see here how continuous decrease of extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa is suddenly reversed in 2020. But this has happened actually, as you can see in the right graph, in every region of the world. The other indicator or the other area that clearly triggers this reverse of tendency is that of the unemployment rate due to the economic slowdown. But the truth is that the pandemic has affected every single goal. So if we think about, I was talking about the food insecurity, that would be goal 2. Obviously, goal 3 with health and well-being has been tremendously affected. Access to quality education. We've seen children out of school for months and months around the world. It's been billions of children have been out of school. Gender equality, we've seen the rates of domestic violence increase drastically during the lockdowns. And the only indicators, or multilateralism, I mean, I think it's very obvious, especially this week, where that is at. The only indicators where we've seen some progress triggered by the pandemic were the environment indicators. So we did see a slight improvement over the first half of 2020, but as I was saying before, unfortunately followed by a reversal of tendency and a bounce back sort. Now, to be fair, even before the pandemic, no country was on track to achieving the goals. And what we see is that every single region in the world has a number of major challenges across the board. So with high-income countries, these major challenges are mostly localized in the environment goals, as well as inequality and the food system that is tremendously unsustainable. With low-income countries, it's also the poverty, hunger, and access goals. But we see that every single region has red dots. We can also, perhaps very briefly, we've made a point of mapping out the spillover effects. Countries, so we see so we see that the performance of high-income countries in the index is slightly better. But what we see when we start measuring the spillover effects is that this is at the expense of generating negative spillover effects in other regions. These may be environmental spillover effects, but it can also be social spillover effects. And we think that countries need to analyze these carefully when defining their implementation strategies. So what is the role of universities in achieving the SDGs? So just to give a very quick example, these spillover effects analysis could not be possible without the help of academia. Because in fact, it's universities that are doing the spillover effect analysis. There is no massive official data on these, and it's universities in different regions of the world developing methodologies to map what impact their countries are having outside. Now, as it was mentioned before, the SDSN Australia Pacific and New Zealand network launched a guide 3 years ago, I believe, on how to get started with the SDGs at the level of universities. Now, before I dig directly into it, if we think about everything that has been already said, achieving the SDGs require deep economic, social, and technological transformations. These will include rapid scale-up of high-quality services such as health and education, but it will also require completely shifting our economy to net zero carbon emissions, and also deep changes to global food systems. If we think only about the energy system, and this is one of what we have mapped to be 6 big transformations, the fossil fuel energy system was developed step by step over 200 years with complex relationships between social, economic, infrastructures, systems. And now it must be completely overhauled in just a few decades. And not just in one country, but everywhere in the world in this extremely short time frame. So these transformations call for unprecedented problem solving at all scales, from the local to the global. And this problem solving will require transdisciplinary research and dissemination of sustainable development know-how and technologies. And all of these depends on the deep engagement of universities. Now, what is in it for universities? So why would universities think that this is an important agenda for them? Engaging with the SDGs benefit universities. First of all, this helps university demonstrate their impact in their communities, because sustainable development maps out the biggest challenges that we're facing. It can also help universities capture the demand of SDG-based education. These are, as I've said, the biggest challenges that we're facing, and governments, city officials, NGOs, the private sector are thirsty for the skills required to address these challenges, and universities can be the ones providing, as it was mentioned before, this kind of education. This can also help universities build new partnerships with the private sector, again, with cities, and in turn also raise funds, identify new sources of funding, and transform the university into a globally responsible actor. Now, if we move from the why to the what are the pillars of how universities can contribute to the achievement of the SDGs? Let's begin with education and research, and these two are already recognized in a number of the goals as being essential. So of course we have goal 4 on quality education, and specifically target 4.7 on providing high quality education on sustainable development for all. But the contribution of universities to the SDGs is much broader, as they can support the implementation of every single one of the SDGs and of the framework itself. And they can do this through the research, of course. So vital for the achievement of the SDGs will be the relevant knowledge, as well as evidence-based and solutions. Governments and other types of organizations will need rigorous pathways that map out whether or not achieving these goals is possible, and then what are some of the specific challenges that this country or this region is going to face. As I was saying before, universities, through their research capacity, can also help mapping what are some of the indicators that we need to better understand whether or not we're making the right progress. How can we use new technologies to incorporate them to the monitoring frameworks of the country? And then, of course, universities can help build capacity, not just at the national level, but also abroad in developing countries to help achieve the SDGs. I think quite a bit was said already about the role of education. Education will be vital, not just because we need new sets of skills to address sustainable development challenges, but also we need engaged students. We need the motivation to act, to become actors of change. And then ultimately, in terms of the types of education that will be required, there will be a general basis that everyone will need to know about the challenges of sustainable development, but then there will be very specific education for each discipline. So the way that a medical doctor can contribute to the achievement of the SDGs is very different to how, for example, an architect or a mathematician can contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. And these kind of job-specific skills will also need to be developed. But universities are an institution in themselves that have a very important role in their communities. In some cities, universities are almost like the campus is almost like a small city in itself. So this means that universities need to think about how to implement the goals within the institution. Mapping out the internal policies, making sure that the procurement laws are in line with the SDGs, that the employment laws are in line with the SDGs, that the food offered in the cafeteria is in line with the SDGs, that the institution itself is decarbonizing, etc. And this is very important also because the university then becomes a sort of living lab. And we're seeing how some of one very encouraging effect of this is that the parents of students of the university are suddenly seeing how the university is transforming, how this is becoming a better environment to spend time in their children, and are visualizing how these could be implemented in their cities and how these could be scaled up. Finally, universities have, in most countries around the world, a position of neutrality, of leadership within our communities. And this is something that universities need to utilize and need to stand up for. Universities need to engage their citizens and their communities, and they need to take an engaged role in the challenges of their communities. They can facilitate, and they can create and facilitate and extend cross-sectoral dialogue and action. And this is vital. We're seeing how some of our networks are becoming absolute experts on these multi-stakeholder partnerships, bringing together to what is a seemingly neutral space, the city officials, the public sector, along with citizen organization, faculty members, to think through specific challenges and to find solutions that have consensus, and have this concept of leaving no one behind. And then finally, of course, through these, universities can demonstrate their commitment. I'm just checking the time to make sure. So the guide on getting started with the SDGs offers a step-by-step idea of how universities can pursue this role. This may seem like a bit of a very classic theory of change model, no? But I think it's relevant still. And then I will also briefly speak about how much we've changed this in the second guide. So the idea would be to map by understanding where you're at. So who are the champions of the SDGs in your university? What kind of research as your university is doing? What kind of research is being conducted that is relevant for the SDGs? What are some of the educational programs that are already incorporating the SDGs into their curriculum, etc.? The next step would be to build capacity and ownership. So to further analyze the results of step one, and then decide, and as it was said before, it's very important that not just the faculty is included in this process, but that the whole university is included, that the administration, that the students, that the workers at the university are included to share their concerns and their motivations, their excitement. And so here would be the area what you would need to start thinking about, whether you can have trainings that can benefit the university staff, whether workshops to raise awareness about the SDGs would be necessary, whether a peer-to-peer mentoring program with the SDGs advocates within the university, or setting up living labs to showcase some of the work that is being conducted, etc. The third step would be to identify priorities, opportunities, and gaps. And this is an important one because it's an opportunity to also bring together that that university, whole of the university approach, and develop a joint vision. So the idea would be to find out what are some of the challenges of the community that we're at. How can we contribute? Do we have already the capacities that we need to contribute to these challenges? What are other areas that where maybe our community is not particularly affected, but our university is very strong at this type of research, and maybe what we can do is build capacity elsewhere, or really identify solutions that can be scaled up or worked through with the private sector. Now, step 4 is where perhaps we move a bit away from this incremental approach. The idea here originally was to think, with all the information that we've gathered, with this vision that we now have, and some capacity building program for the university as a whole, how can we now make sure that the SDGs permeate every single aspect of the university? As I was saying before, do we have a public transportation system in the university, and is it carbon neutral, or how does it work? Do we have an employment policy that ensures diversity and equity? Do we have a nutritious and sustainable diet in the offered in the cafeteria? So every single aspect of the university. So this is where really we can think about a more or a less incremental approach. So we can go step by step, and this will depend on the capacities of the university. But the truth is that if we want universities to really lead on this agenda, then we probably need universities to think about really transforming themselves. And this is, so the analysis of what that transformation would mean is analyzed in more detail in the second guide. And this is something that we're continuing our work on, because the idea here would be to really think about, if we want to reach the SDGs at the scale that the SDGs and the pace that the SDGs demand, universities need to do things differently, almost entirely differently. So we do need the discipline research, but we also need radically transdisciplinary research. We do need tradition education to continue, but we also need radical ways to teach and learn that the university is the best position to deliver. And so here there are different methodologies to think through how to transform the university, but I think it really depends on the context. And I will now post the link of the second guide in case you want to see some of the examples. Now, these two guides, and I think okay, so my last 2 slides are just to mention that SDSN has this massive network of universities around the world. With this number has gone up with 1,600 university actually members, of which about 80% are universities and the other are research centers and think tanks, but that are sharing examples across the network, trying to learn from each other on how they are conducting these transformations, how to do research and education, and how to transform their operations to be aligned with the SDGs. And so I'll stop sharing now, but what I wanted to say just to conclude is that that indeed this transformation is extremely hard. The guides that we've prepared have numerous examples from around the world, as well as many resources on how to conduct a workshop, for example, with different stakeholders within the university on the SDGs, or how to organize a new partnership with city officials and the likes. I'll share those 2 links in case you want to have a look, and then I think I'll stop here and see whether there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Perhaps the links you could put the link in the chat so that it would be copyable. So again, thank you very much for the very inspiring talk. It's I think the highlight is the complexity of everything and how the role of universities to respond to that complexity at all levels of their operations. Are there any questions? Maybe you can write your question down in the chat or just raise your hand. I don't see any raised hands. Am I missing someone? Okay, then maybe yes.
Maybe thank you very much for the presentation. What I wanted to ask is if there are any initiatives that the network takes for networking and communication. Are there any special conferences where universities can participate and maybe present what they're doing and listen to what others are doing, or are there any special initiatives that are undertaken so that we could maybe look into all these very interesting challenges you have proposed, but maybe in much more depth and therefore with providing a framework for solution?
Thank you very much. This is a great question, and this is precisely what we are trying to do, to create those spaces for universities to liaise with each other. So to answer very concretely, annually SDSN organizes the International Conference for Sustainable Development that actually this year will make 10 years. This is it was firstly, so it's co-organized with Columbia University in New York, and it coincides with the United Nations General Assembly in September. This is a 3 to 4 day event with researchers and academics from around the world. The last 2 years, this has been an online conference. Every year we have about 1,000 participants. And this year, the last 2 years, because it was online, we had many more because of course people did not have to travel to New York. I think this coming year, so actually 2022, it will be a hybrid event. So there will be the possibility of joining both online and in person. I'll add the link to the conference here too. On top of that, we have an intranet for the members of SDSN, such as your university. This is called Mobilize. And in this intranet, our members, and here, since you are a part of this member institution, you could get access to this intranet. And what we have there is, it's sort of a board where people post their initiatives and their work. And then finally, so we have a number of communication tools. So we have a newsletter that is published every month with some of these examples. We have a platform with case studies on how universities are conducting SDG relevant education. So what I will do is that I'll post all of these links in the chat, and I will also liaise with your colleagues organizing this call today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
There was a question in the chat by Vironas. Vironas is asking if there are any metrics or predictions about the possible impact of universities' SDG alignment.
This is a great question. So we too have had some discussions with the Times Education Impact Ranking. There are a number of others out there. So an association of mostly Anglo-Saxon universities, ASHI, is also producing another evaluation of the impact of universities in the SDGs. Our position is that these are analyses that need to be improved, because they do evaluate, the indicators are not extremely appropriate for all of the goals. And so there is a question mark as to how universities can measure their own progress. And for example, there is an initiative in the US to start developing, as the sort of mirroring the voluntary national reviews that countries have to do. I think it's twice in the whole period of the SDGs at least. So they have to prepare a report of how they've been, what's the national strategy of implementation, and how, what's the progress done, etc. And so in the US, there is now a movement of universities trying to do a university voluntary review. And they're using the model of the countries to present the progress that they themselves are doing. This is a bit more granular, because besides the indicators, it allows for quite a bit of analysis of specific measures that have been taken, how they are having a non-quantitative impact in the life of the university, well-being of students. And so I think this is maybe something that you may want to have a look at.
Thank you. Thank you.
More questions? No, as I cannot see everybody, maybe you can just turn on your, Mr. Demosthenes.
Thank you, Chrysathi. Thank you very much. I don't have any question, but I would like to thank very much Mrs. Cortés for this very interesting presentation. It certainly puts things into perspective, and this is something we definitely want to engage as a university. I'm very happy to see that the Council is very much supportive on this direction, and I think this is a passion that the academic management shares, and I commit we will focus on this matter. Thank you very much, Mrs. Cortés.
Thank you. It was my honor to join you today.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, somebody might want to comment or.
Exactly, may I have say something, please, Marius? I wanted to ask Mrs. Cortés, why don't we start with kindergarten as well? I mean, this is because universities in 2050 or something will have students from these people now, who are in the age of 5 or 6. Thanks.
This is a great question, and there is a simple answer, and it's that we cannot wait until 2050. So we need those that are going to graduate this year to know something about sustainable development, because we need them to go onto their jobs and have that motivation and that sensibility. But I think you are absolutely right. We are probably late. So we need to start in kindergarten. We need to go all the way up to university, and the programs need to be adapted all the way from 0 to 23. And in fact, the SDSN is working on a program for school teachers, and also we have 2 programs. So one on global schools, where we're working with teachers from across the world on training materials that they can use, and then one with UNESCO and the Ban Ki-moon Foundation called Mission 4.7, making reference to the target 4.7 on education for all on sustainable development. And here the focus is kindergarten, primary and secondary school. So yes, I agree with you. I think that is essential, but we also need university students.
Thank you. Patrick Donner?
Yes, very good point you made there, Marius. And of course, the thing is that we don't teach in kindergarten, so we can't really do it there. And the solution is not to say, and I don't think you implied that either, that somebody else should be doing something. What we do, I'm in the Maritime Transport Department, but those in the Education Department, of course, should think about how to include the SDGs in the curriculum and teaching in the Department of Education for the teaching of future kindergarten teachers. So it's a two-step way to go there. But it's absolutely right that that is where we need to start. I mean, if we think about the success of a program like Helmepa, which has then spread to other countries, including Cyprus, Saimepa, it's through the children, the youngsters and school children, that the awareness of what can be done to to stop the degradation of the environment at the grassroots level. I don't think the shipping industry would have done much about the environment if it hadn't been for the pressure from and the awareness building from the general public that you don't just throw things overboard because it disappears out of sight, out of mind. And it's the same thing with the SDGs, that it needs to be, they need to be emphasized and worked on throughout the entire population at every step. And that it's everything about abolishing plastic bags where they are not appropriate, and certainly if where they are appropriate, to make sure that they are sustainably recycled. And that's just one level where every one of us has to think every single day about what we do. And that, I think, is where, quite rightly, you start at the kindergartens, primary schools, and throughout the educational process. So maybe by the time, if we had had that throughout our lives, maybe we would have understood it without needing to have webinars about it.
Okay, Victoria?
Yes, well, Patrick already answered what I was going to say. I am from the education department. So yes, we have this role, and we have embedded in our courses and integrated sustainable development issues. So we are educating the future kindergarten teachers and primary school teachers, and we are very much aware of our role in this process. So we are at the same time educating university students, but also, the future educators. Moreover, we are also offering professional development courses in service teachers. And this raises a bit the question of how you actually document this impact, because with in-service teachers, we ask them to implement things in their schools. So we had a snowball effect, which from a small project, we ended up, just in Cyprus, approaching 700 students. But the work was done through the arts, and the arts do not really like quantitative data. And we had exhibitions, and we influenced the community, and the not just the school community, but the community of the schools. But how do you put that in metrics is another question that really puzzles us, because in education, our role is to make people aware and change attitudes. And so it's not it's not that easy to put everything in metrics. So thank you.
I could not agree more. In fact, I mean, we use the Sustainable Development Report and the measurements and the quantitative data, but I find this tyranny of data to be quite annoying. And I mean, there are so many crucial things, such as ethics, that cannot be measured. And I could not agree with you more on the second thing that you raised, the importance of arts and cultural institutions, not just arts, but also cultural institutions themselves in achieving the SDGs. Similar to universities, by motivating us, by shaking our conscience, but then also because they are institutions that are very relevant in our communities, and they have impacts in employment, in equity. So yes, in fact, we try to work with cultural institutions also because we find them to be very impactful, to have a big capacity to impact.
There is a question in the chat by Carol Bailey, and Mr. Touliados also wants to ask something. Shall I, Mr. Touliados, do you want to ask your question, and then I will?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Cortez. But perhaps there is a more simple and primer step. Most of our students coming to the universities, not only in Cyprus, everywhere I have taught, have no idea about the planet's condition, have no idea about biodiversity, nothing in knowledge about CO2 and so on. So perhaps it should be primarily establish some lessons explaining this condition, and also through the universities to transfer such primary knowledge to the elementary schools. We started such things already with this university, but it can be increased, because without this primary understanding, all these measures are far away from most of our future scientists. Nobody understands the role of the construction. So perhaps this is a more simple way to start from low, explain the, as you told already, urgent danger. To remind what, I'm very curious because nobody is remembering what the IDNDR for 10 years have studied in the United Nations about what is coming on. In our university, we try a little bit to remember those conclusions. They are forgotten already. So perhaps we should start, and I think we can increase that in our university to transfer the basic knowledge about what does it mean, what the forests mean for this effort. Nobody understands that, about what timber can do and so on. So thank you very much, and I think we can increase those efforts.
Thank you. That's a very good point. And I agree with you. I think raising awareness of these issues is the primary step. It's true, though, that this is something that students are becoming more aware of, also because when they look at employment opportunities, more and more having some sort of knowledge of these is important. It's important for, as I was saying, if you want to work in government, if you want to work in the private sector, on NGOs. So this is becoming also something that is becoming relevant for them as they look at their potential careers. But the vast majority of the population is unaware of all of these very complex system dynamics and how they are interconnected as you said, timber with very deeply disturbing social issues. So it's that complexity that needs to be made available in a perhaps simplified way to everyone.
And we also have a question by Carol Bailey in the chat. Is there a maturity matrix using metrics to allow any university to assess where it is on the SDG journey and what it can aspire to as an achievable next step?
So this is again a very good question, and we've debated quite a bit about this. I think the guides provide a way for universities to figure out their own situation, but we decided to stay away from trying to normalize a system for all universities, because context matters a lot. It's very difficult to compare a university in Senegal to a university in Sweden. So in terms of the capacity that they have, in terms of the local consciousness that there is about these topics and so on, this makes it very difficult to make a comparable and universal system. But I think universities can find some guidelines on how to measure their own progress and vis-a-vis their own position.
Can I just expand on my question a little bit? It's Carol Bailey here. I'm not thinking of the maturity matrix so much in terms of comparisons, but in terms of goal setting and aspiration. So I understand fully that there's going to be a different scope for each institution. But in order to assess where you are, is there some sort of description of what good looks like, so that you could compare to that and say, in that area, is it one, relevant to our institution? And two, if it is it critical? Is it mission critical? In which case we need to be good. Or is it something that we can afford to, to remove in the terms of priority? So that's the sort of matrix I'm thinking of rather than comparative.
Yeah. No, I think that's you've kind of hit the nail with the hammer. So I briefly mentioned that we're now looking into the university as a whole transformation, and we've set up a working group that is precisely thinking through what is the transformation of the university sector. No? And one of the issues that we're struggling with is precisely what you've just said. What is that ideal university? And I'll say that, and I'm sure you can think about similar areas. There are things where there's absolute agreement. No, there needs to be more interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. There needs to be a bigger focus on the problems of societies and communities. The university needs to involve the community into their research, what's their operations, and so. But there are many other aspects that we are wondering if there is a one clear, this is the ideal scenario. So in fact, what we decided, because we were having discussions, we're actually hosting meetings for presidents of universities across the world. We've done 2 already with over 100 presidents in the last 2, and we have 2 to come. And we're asking this kind of question. So what we've decided is to actually do an online poll. So we're going to be launching this in the next few months, and we want to have as far reach as possible. So we want not just faculty members and students and university administrations to give us their opinion, but we also want to analyze data coming from cities and NGOs and the private sector, answering precisely that question. What do we need universities to be like to be able to achieve the SDGs? What are some of the key operational things that need to change? What are some of the aspects of research that needs to evolve, or education? What are some of the key regulatory frameworks that will need to change, or how? No? So again, I'm sorry that I cannot provide a magic bullet solution on this, but what I can tell you is that this is the very question that we're trying to answer. And I'll keep you all posted on this poll and of course of the results of it and what our analysis concludes on that.
Yes. Well, there is no magic solution, and the one formula cannot, I mean, not everyone can fit one formula. So, yes. In the chat, we also have a comment about a research project that is running by the university, which is about the professionalization of academic teaching. It is a driver to go forward in reconstructing curricula, and this is a project run by one of our colleagues, Professor Vasilios Makrakis. So it's a process of reviewing, revisioning the content of curricula in order to identify niches and identify opportunities for the SDGs integration in other countries. So that's something that we could learn from and also apply it ourselves. Do we have any other questions or?
Unfortunately, I will need to leave in 1 minute though. I just wanted to.
Yeah. So if we want to wrap it up, and thank you very, very much for the talk and your time and all the links and useful information you have provided us. It's a lot of good food for thought.
Crisanti, as a final word, I would like to thank Maria. Thank you for your efforts and your leadership. Your guides are very important and are definitely helping us and guiding us on how to integrate the SDGs in our university. I'm very happy to see so many colleagues here today. And I want to assure everyone that as a university, we're committed in our responsibility in the transition to a sustainable future. So Maria, thank you again for being so open, and I assure you we will be back with questions and hopefully with sharing good examples. And so thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It was an honor, and congratulations on the phenomenal work that you're already doing as a great example to the whole network. Looking forward to hearing back from you. Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Very much.